ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Okay, so now I'm going on to the fifth claims. So Imam Ghazali rahimahullah has been making a few claims. He's made the claim that Allah exists, and he's backed that up using some evidences. He claimed that Allah is eternal, pre-eternal, that is, he's always existed, and he's then claimed that Allah is post-eternal too, and then most recently he has claimed that Allah isn't an accident, and he justifies this by explaining or referring back to his first claim, where he argued that bodies and accidents are things which change. They subsist within space, and they are in states of change, and they are new events, and that because they are new events, they cannot be used to describe what Allah is. So remember we said that if something is spatially located, then it is something which must have motion in it or rest in it, and motion and rest we discussed in detail how they entail as a hawadith, and that's therefore they are also hadith. So that's why Allah cannot be a jawhar, an atom, as something which is indivisible. And then we would also say the next argument is the fifth claim, that he isn't a jism. So he isn't a jism. What is it? ندعي أن صانع العالم ليس بجسم. So we are making the claim that the creator of the world isn't a body. So just to contextualize, remember what body meant here. A body was something which is in space and can be further divided. So with this reason that he cannot be a body or a jism is because a jism is something which is composed of two or more atoms which inhere in space, so localized atoms. And since he can't be an atom, in a fortiori he can't be a body. Also, this would imply that he's composed. If he's composed of physical parts, then some people might run the argument of composition against this view of God, though it's not the best argument, the argument from composition. Also, if he's a body, then he would have a specific miqdar. What's that? This means that he would have a specific size or measurement, and this measurement or size could be bigger or smaller. And because it could have been bigger or smaller, and so that specification, that specific size, it would require a sufficient reason, a sabab. And we said before that everything that is newly originated requires a sabab, sufficient reason. So then this would make the creator of the world become analogous to that which is a new event, which is part of the created order, because that it's only a new event or something which is created because it requires a sufficient reason or an explanation for its existence. So that would mean that if God had a specific size which required a specific sufficient reason for its explanation, then it could be that sufficient reason would be something that would be higher than God in the hierarchy of causes. So God would no longer be the first cause, so he wouldn't be the conclusion of that initial claim or argument. He also notes something quite interesting. He says if you use the word jism just to mean something other than what we are saying here. So remember we said here a jism is something which is made up of two or more atoms and it has a specific size. Then once again you need to consider the lughawi, the literal or the dictionary definition, and the shari'i definition and its implications, and whether that would be permissible or not according to the fuqaha. And it's best to be cautious with regards to the attributes of Allah. The next claim, الدعوة السادسة ندعي أن صانع العالم ليس بعرض. So he's now making the claim that Allah, or the creator of the world, the cause of the world, isn't an accident. This is because the existence of an accident is such that it must subsist within something else. It must inhere in an essence. It cannot exist by itself. It's a feature, a property of something else. So accidents are bodies and atoms. Accidents exist within bodies and atoms. And since jisms, bodies, are hadith, then the states that appear within it, i.e. the accidents that subsist within the jism, would also be hadith, because they would exist within something which is a new event. So the Arabic, لأن نعني بالعرض ما يستدعي أي وجوده ذات تقوم به وذلك الذات جسم أو جوهر. So I already said that. what we mean by an accident is that which depends on something for its existence, and that entity is a body or an absence. ومهما كان الجسم واجب الحدوث كان الحال فيه أيضا حادثا لا محالة. So since the body, it is necessarily a newly emergent thing, then the states which occur within it would also be newly emergent. إذ يبطل الانتقال الأعراض. So we've already discussed how accidents, they can't be said to transfer from one body to another. So someone might argue that accidents they don't simply subsist within bodies, rather they move from one to another. But then that's quite a big claim to say that there are these accidents which move around. And from our observations, and that's our sense data, and that's one of our main criteria for determining what's truth, we see that accidents they fade away and vanish by themselves like motion. قد بينا أن صانع العالم قديم فلا يمكن أن يكون عرضا. It's not possible for an internal thing to be an accident. وإن فهم من العرض ما هو صفة للشيء من غير أن يكون ذلك الشيء متحيزا فنحن لا ننكر وجود هذا، فإن نستدل على صفات الله تعالى. نعم، يرجع النزاع إلى إطلاق اسم الصانع والفاعل، فإن إطلاقه على الذات الموصوفة بالصفات أولى من إطلاقه على الصفات. If by an accident you just mean an attribute which doesn't require a spatial location, then we don't deny the existence of this, because obviously we believe in the attributes of Allah, and the attributes of Allah exist within His essence, but they do not. So they could be likened to an accident in a sense, because they are a feature or property of a thing, but they don't exist within a spatial being, as accidents generally do. But if you by accident you just mean something which exists as an attribute, as something which exists within as something which exists, or something which is an added meaning to an essence, then we aren't denying that. We believe in this. فإذا قلنا الصانع ليس بصفة عنينا به أن الصنع مضاف إلى الذات التي تكون بهما الصفات لا إلى الصفات. So sometimes we say that the creator isn't an attribute. So what we mean by this is God's actions, like creating, they are attributed to His essence, in which the attributes actually subsist. So we don't say that the attributes so these powers which Allah has, these meanings which Allah has, they exist within some separate entity known as these attributes. Rather, these meanings are the attributes. So God's actions and creatings are attributed to His essence, and this essence has attributes, these added meanings, not to the attributes themselves. So like, for example, is كما أن إذا قلنا أن النجار ليس بعرض ولا صفة علينا به أن صنعة النجارة غير مضافة إلى الصفات بل إلى الذات الواجب وصفها بجملة من الصفات حتى يكون صانعا. كذا القول في صانع العالم، وإن أراد المنازع بالعرض أمرا غير الحال في الجسم وغير الصفة القائمة بالذات كان الحق في منعه اللغة أو الشرع لا للعقل. So, for example, when we speak of a carpenter, the skill of carpentry itself, so this is just so what we're doing now is we are just expanding on what we mean when we say that we call Allah the creator. This then what we mean by this, and we say when we say Allah, when we say Allah is the creator and we say the creator isn't an attribute, what we mean by this is this act or this creating is attributed to Allah's essence, in which the attributes subsist, not to the attributes themselves. So it's just like as with a carpenter, the skill of carpentry, the carpenter is not, when you talk about a person who is a carpenter, he himself isn't the carpentry itself, right? But rather he is the person who possesses that skill. So God is not his power or knowledge, but he's the essence that has those attributes. That's what we mean by this. So it might have sounded quite complicated what I just said previously, but all we're saying is that Allah isn't identical to his attributes, rather his essence his essence is the thing that instantiates these attributes. So the term Sani, maker, rightly applies to the essence, not to an attribute like power. So because Sani is a name of Allah, you could say, and it's we would say that we won't say that Allah's qudra, Allah's power is the Sani, rather we will say Allah's essence is the Sani. Same way, we won't say when we say the person is a carpenter, we won't say that his skill of carpentry is the thing that actually did the work of putting carpets down, for example. Rather, it is the person himself who has the skill of carpentry that puts the carpets down. Similarly, Allah, who has Allah's essence, that contains. So these words, obviously, you could just think of them as figurative. So there is caution when I say these words. Like Allah's essence contains the attribute of power, which gives rise to creation. So therefore, we will call Allah as in the sense Allah His essence. We'll call His essence the Creator. So if someone defines accidents in a way that goes beyond the standard definitions, their objection isn't based on logic, but on word usage or scriptural interpretation. This is like a proto-trope type ontology. So in modern terms, you have trope theories where when we say an attribute or a property of a thing doesn't add anything to the essence in terms of quantity, but it does provide additional meaning, then this is something which are instantiated by the essence. Then you could say, so instantiations of properties by an essence, you could say that's like a trope. It might be a better definition than that, but these tropes, they don't add quantity to the being, so there isn't composition because of a trope. As awkward as that sounds, as that might be, but this is actually a legitimate philosophy and a position that's well established, and many people accept this as well. So, for example, when you say there's a shirt which is red, that redness is an instantiation of redness. So we're not saying that redness is something out there which that shirt is now instantiating. Rather, it's a trope which exists with the shirt, and that shirt instantiates that redness, that property. So yeah, and so it doesn't imply composition. So that's what you could sort of liken it to that. Allah's attributes, not obviously indirectly or one for one, but there are some similarities there, I guess. The seventh claim, الدعوة سابعة ندعي أنه ليس في جهة مخصوصة من الجهات الستة. So this is actually now a controversial discussion in today's time that we're claiming that Allah is not in a direction. This is because He would then be specified and would request some things, and this would mean, if He's specified, that means there would need to be something outside Him to have specified Him. So if He's in a direction, why is He specifically in that direction for? Is there something which is limiting His existence within that specific location, specifying Him there? That would mean that He is contingent, and this does so. Because He's contingent, He cannot be the first cause. So we don't even need to think about atoms and accidents from this perspective. As space becomes, you can define it in terms of atoms and accidents if you want, but all things are in a direction when it is attributed to another space. So when one thing in relation to another thing is in a direction. So one thing which exists in a specific space, when you want to consider its relationship to another thing that exists in another space, then this relationship is a direction. So all things in a direction are in a space. When we say something is in direction, a jiha, then this has two intelligible meanings. The first one is that it occupies space and prevents other bodies from being there. So when we say something is in a direction, that means that it is in a specific location, and because it's in that specific location, other bodies cannot be in that specific location like a substance. That's the first possible meaning that you could have. So if next time I say, the Kaaba is in another direction, that means that direction which the Kaaba is in, that it prevents other bodies or substances from being in that specific place. Because if there was something else in that place, then how could the Kaaba be there as well? Rather, they would be in. You could say it was on top of it, but that's no longer the same space. And the second intelligible meaning is that it inheres in a body that is in a space. So it could be an accident. So it could be the color of the Kaaba is in that specific direction. So we could say that the Kaaba is in that direction, and the features of the Kaaba are in that direction. So because Allah is neither a body nor an accident, as we have previously shown, these meanings cannot apply to Him. So He cannot be in a jiha. He cannot be something which exists in a space, occupies a space which prevents other beings from being in that space. And He is not an accident, like we have said, because an accident requires a substance to exist within. If someone means something else by direction, then we don't really know what that means. So these are two important points to remember. When we say direction, we mean something which occupies a space, preventing other bodies from existing there. And the second is that if it's not a body, then it must be something like an accident, which inheres inside a body. And Allah is neither of these. Someone might mean something else by direction, but we don't know what this is. It's not intelligible to. It's normally not intelligible to use this other meaning for direction in language or revelation. So if they say they mean something beyond these two, we won't deny that until we understand what they are exactly proposing. But we object to the wording because it falsely implies implies bodily characteristics, anthropomorphic characteristics to Allah. If what they mean does not entail change or contingency, we don't deny it. But if it does, and it contradicts Allah's necessary and essential nature, eternal nature, then we will reject this. So then saying Allah is above because is another issue. So saying Allah is above. So in the Arabic, if we just look again, in just before we discuss Allah being above, it does give a description of what we mean by jiha as well. There are 6 different directions: the fawq, the above, or asfal, below, qidam, in front, khalf, behind, yameen, right, and shimal, left. And then he goes, when فمعنى كون شيء فوقنا هو أنه في حيز يلي جانب الرأس. When we say something is above, it means it's something towards above our head. ومعنى كونه تحت أنه في حيز يلي جانب الرجل. And when we say something is below, then it's towards towards next to our feet. وكذا سائر الجهات. فكل ما قيل فيه أنه في جهة فقد قيل أنه في حيز مع زيادة إضافة. So whenever we say something is in a direction, then this necessarily implies that it is also within a location. قلنا الشيء في حيز يعقل بوجهين أحدهما. Okay, then we've already explained that. وإن أراد أمرا غير هذا فهو غير مفهوم. If he means something other than those 2 things that we've discussed here, then that isn't intelligible to us. فيكون. So he does later on, he does actually explain how specifying direction implies something isn't necessary. This is because أن الجهة التي تختص به لا تختص به لذاته. If we specify our direction to something, it's not because of its essence that is in that specific direction. This is because all directions are equivalent in relation to a direction, to the direction that's being faced towards. So maybe something might be right for someone else and it's left for someone else. They're relational. فاختصاصه ببعض الجهات المعينة ليس بواجب للذات بل هو جائز. So the directions, the specific directions, they aren't essential to an essence, but they are possible. So because they are only possible, we said things which are possible require specification. Because it requires specification, ويكون اختصاصه فيه معنى زائدا على ذاته. This specification is an additional meaning upon the essence of a thing. وما يتطرق الجواز إليه استحالة قدمه. And those things which have possibility within them, they cannot be eternal. بل القديم عبارة عما هو واجب الوجود. Eternal thing is something which is a necessary existence من جميع الجهات. And this means that it is necessary. It is for what it is necessary from all the directions. فإن قيل اختص بجهة فوق لأنه أشرف الجهات. If someone says that he has been specified with being above, so saying God is above because it's the most noble direction. لأنه أشرف الجهات. فقلنا أي إنما صارت الجهة جهة فوق بخلقه العالم في هذا الحيز الذي خلقه فيه. So here it's only the noblest direction. So saying God is above because it's the noble direction, he says it's invalid because being above and below only exists after the creation of spatial beings. Before creation there was no head, foot, up or down. So, and then the second reason that he says that God Allah is in a direction is because لو كان بجهة لكان محاذيا لجسم العالم. If he was in a direction, then he would be adjacent to the body of the world. So being in a direction would mean Allah is adjacent to bodies. وكل محاذ فإما أصغر منه وإما أكبر وإما مساو. So when things are adjacent, they can either, it implies a size. That size could be larger, smaller, or equal. And all of these things, like this comparison in terms of size, obviously entails measurement. وذلك المقدار يجوز في العقل أن يفرض أصغر منه أكبر فيحتاج إلى مقدار مخصص. So because it's possible, this size which you give to this thing, it's possible to think of or suppose something smaller than it or bigger than it. Therefore فيحتاج, and because it's possible to think of or conceive of something smaller or bigger than it, then it would then require a specific size and something to specify it, which would make it contingent. And this is impossible for the eternal God. And someone might argue, what about accidents? They don't actually have measurements, right? But they could be in a direction. For example, a color which is in the direction of the body that it inheres within, or which it inheres within. That doesn't have, we know this by, we can visually observe that the color doesn't have a measurement. But because accidents, they exist only in space because of the relation to substances, and their number is also limited by the number of bodies, this also shows that they have dependencies. So these accidents, they require bodies to exist, so they are also dependent, and Allah can be a dependent thing. That's why there's this Christian guy who was arguing that maybe we could say Allah is a trope of omnipotence, but tropes are instantiations of things. What is Allah? If Allah is an omnipotent trope, or is he instantiating exactly? Is he an instantiation of something else? Allah knows best what this guy means by this, really. And then there's obviously the bigger debate. فإن قيل فإن لم يكن مخصوصا بجهة فوق فما بال الوجوه والأيدي ترفع إلى السماء في الأدعية شرعا وطبعا. If someone might contend that if you don't specify the direction of aboveness, then why do the faces and why do the heads and the hands turn towards the sky when they are praying? Both from, and this is something supported by Sharia and by habit. وأنبأه صلى الله عليه وسلم قال للجارية التي قصد اعتاقها فرض أي إيمانها أين الله فأشارت إلى السماء فقال إنها مؤمنة صلى الله عليه وسلم. And also there's the hadith, the famous hadith which everyone discusses. What was the point of where the Prophet ﷺ wanted to free the slave and he wanted to show her, test her true iman. He asked her, where is Allah? And she pointed to the sky, and the Prophet ﷺ then said that she's a believer. So as for raising hands in the sky in supplication, and the Prophet asking where's God, this is like, so Imam Ghazali says, rahimahullah, says this is like facing the Kaaba in prayer. Allah isn't inside the Kaaba, but He sanctified it to give us a fixed direction for worship and focus. So the sky serves as a direction of supplication, not a location for Allah. That's actually an interesting response. Physical gestures also, like raising hands or lowering the face to the ground, aim to affect the heart. So prostrating on the ground humbles the body and reminds the heart of man's low origins, dust, which deepens spiritual humility. These acts direct the body to express and reinforce internal submissions to Allah's greatness. And the sky, because it symbolizes exaltedness, highness, not really God's location. The Sharia uses physical, and therefore the Sharia uses physical gestures like raising the face to the sky to help direct the hearts towards Allah's greatness. So because the sky represents greatness, because obviously it's big and vast and high, then we raise our face towards this to help direct our hearts towards Allah's greatness. But true glorification lies in the heart's belief in Allah's elevated rank, not in its spatial height, and the limbs follow the heart in expressing reverence. So in prayer we raise our hands towards heaven because blessings are associated with the heavens. This is where angels, the agents of provision, reside as well. So raise our hands towards the heavens because blessings come from there. And so the angels bring down the blessings from the heavens, like rain and everything. I mean, even scientifically, they say everything that exists on this world that's good is caused by something external, like maybe meteors came with water and etc. Allah knows best. The agents of provision, this is symbolic, like turning towards a palace when provisions are said to come from there without believing the king is actually inside. As for the common folk, some mistakenly think Allah is literally in the sky. The Prophet affirmed the faith of the deaf, or the mute, not the deaf, the mute slave girl who pointed upwards, but not because Allah is in the sky, but because her gesture showed she didn't believe in the idols which existed on the earth. And that indicated sound belief. So that's another way of going around this hadith. So because the idols which were worshipped on the earth existed in the ground and not in the skies, no one built an idol in the sky. So her gesture by pointing towards the sky showed that she didn't worship anything on the earth. And this indicates a sound belief as well. So the objection that a being with no direction of spatial relation is impossible only implies to things capable of spatial relationship. So there's some people argue, and I've heard a lot of people argue this today as well, that it's if something doesn't exist in a space, then it doesn't exist at all. Something to exist, you must exist within a space. But this objection is only in relation to those things which can have a spatial relation. But if Allah doesn't have a spatial relationship because He doesn't occupy space, He doesn't have a body, or He isn't an atom, He isn't subject to these conditions. So for example, He gives an example here: just as a dead body can be neither knowing nor ignorant because it lacks life, so the God can be neither in nor out of space because He lacks spatiality altogether. So it's a false dichotomy, you could say. So He uses another method here. Although so remember we said before, he uses process of elimination and deductive reasoning, and he uses reductio ad absurdum. Here he's also using another method where he shows that it's a false dichotomy to say that you can only exist in space. If you don't exist in space, you don't exist at all, because we could say that just because something if something is neither ignorant nor is not ignorant or knowledgeable, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because a dead body still exists even though it doesn't have knowledge or ignorance. So just because Allah doesn't exist in space, that doesn't mean he doesn't exist at all. Rather, it's just because he isn't within this dichotomy. This category is, he's beyond these categories of being within a space. So he lacks spatiality altogether. It's proven that all spatial things are created, and all created things need an uncreated cause. So a non-spatial being, God, must exist. So we've already proved that spatial things are created. Imam Ghazali is saying, rahimahullah, he's saying that we've proved before that things which exist in space are created, and all created things need something which is not created as a cause. So because it's not created, and we've said that spatial things are created, then this cause must be non-spatial, or else it would be included in the created order. So Allah must exist beyond space. If someone says such a being is unimaginable, well, we don't have a problem with that. That's true. But imagination can only grasp bodies and colors. Basically, what he's saying is our imaginations, they can only conceive of things which we've been exposed to, which we've experienced, and all we've experienced with it from our perceptions are bodies, so other physical objects, and their attributes or their accidents. So however, reason can affirm that which imaginations cannot grasp. So you should make the reason submit not to the imagination, rather the imagination should submit to reason. So then that was quite a lot there. If someone claims that a being beyond space and direction is unimaginable and therefore non-existent, we respond, many real things like imagination, knowledge, emotion, and sound, they cannot be imagined in their essence. So if you ask someone to imagine imagination, it's like a retortion. So imagine the essence of imagination, or imagine the essence of knowledge. These things exist, but we cannot imagine what they are, because the imagination only grasps things with color, size, or shape, and it fails to imagine abstract realities. Like imagine I told you, okay, imagine love. You might think of the implications of love, like the outcomes of love, like a relationship, or a relationship between two people, maybe, or a family, or a husband and wife, or etc., friends. But that relationship is it's a sign of love, but it isn't love itself. But we know that love exists, but just because we can't imagine it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So denying something simply because it can't be visualized is a flawed standard. That's a really good argument, to be honest. And then we have the 8th claim. So الدعوة الثامنة ندعي أن الله تعالى منزه على أن يوصف بالاستقرار على العرش. So this is actually another issue which is disputed today, and is related to the previous one, rather, in fact. So God is above being described as physically, so that's quite important, physically settled, mustaqir, al-istiqrar, physically settled on the throne. And here he does go into a lot of detail as well, because there are quite a few different verses to discuss. There's sayings of the Salaf, there's the knowledge of the scholars versus common people, and what possible interpretations of verses which refers to istiwa al-arsh. But we will discuss that next time, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.